Before 1840, 4 million people lived east of the Appalachian Mountains, but opportunities for more land and bountiful crops pushed one-third of the non-Indian population between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River. They also wanted to move there because of the ruthless federal government. Americans moved west in bursts. By 1803, 4 new states were brought into the Union: Vermont, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio. Another burst occurred between 1816 and 1821, when Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, Maine, and Missouri were brought into the Union. They usually migrated in families and settled near navigable rivers until canals and railroads were created.
Migrants from the east to west brought their customs and ways of life to those regions. Immigrants from New England and upstate New York, named the Yankees, settled in northern Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. They valued public schools, usually lived in houses made of sod, stone, or clapboard, and were quick to form towns. Immigrants from the upland south to the old northwest, named Butternuts, settled in southern parts of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, where they raised corn and hogs. Butternuts lived in log cabins on isolated farmlands, and some were anti-slavery, but many were pro-slavery. An 1824 attempt to legalize slavery in Illinois was only narrowly defeated at the polls. Most Westerners craved sociability, gathered their families in group sports and festivities. Westerners' customs were from the East, but made their own as well. Social activities brought genders together with dances and festivities. Westerners borrowed many things other more fortunate people had without asking and just saying that they had plenty.
The federal government grew in strength, which caused the expansion to the Mississippi. States ceded western land to the federal government as public treasure to settlers. The Land Ordinance of 1785 allowed this land to be surveyed and sold, which later on could be converted into states by the Northwest Ordinance of 1781. The Louisiana Purchase led to the American control of the Mississippi River, and the Transcontinental Treaty of 1819 disappeared Spanish power on the east of the Mississippi. The federal government, which gained power, promised land to the soldiers of War of 1812 if they settled in the West. And to facilitate their displacement, the Congress extended the National Road, which reached Welling, Virginia, Vandalia, and Illinois. All the new settlements, foreign policies, the outcome of the War of 1812 brought misfortune to the Native Americans, which were abandoned by the British after the American victory at the Battle of Plattsburgh in Spain, because of the Transcontinental Treaty. As the white settlers moved west, they found their path was filled with large numbers of natives. The most frequently found natives were those of the 5 civilized tribes, which were the Cherokees, Choctaws, Creeks, Chickasaws, and Seminoles, who were all mixed due to intermarriage with the whites. Because these Indians were an obstacle, the whites agreed to remove them. In 1830, President Jackson passed the Indian Removal Act, which gave him authorization to exchange public lands in the West for Indian territories in the East, and appropriated $500,000 to cover expenses of removal. The Choctaws, Creeks, and Chickasaws' response to the act was voluntary removal to the West, although some Creeks and Seminoles put up a fight, but in vain because they were removed forcibly. Before removal, the Cherokees proclaimed themselves as an independent republic in Georgia and petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court for an injunction to halt Georgia's attempt to claim state jurisdiction over their nation. This was known as the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, in which John Marshall denied their claim to status as a republic within Georgia. Later, John would claim that the Indians were a distinct political community entitled to federal protection from Georgia's claims in the case Worcester versus Georgia. Along with these rulings, the Indians would have to endure their forced removal to the West, which would be called the Trail of Tears. After the War of 1812, rising prices of agricultural commodities had risen to an all-time high due to the capturing of the British and Spanish markets by the U.S. And the demand within the United States intensified because the quickening pace of industrialization and urbanization in the East spurred a shift of workers towards non-agricultural employment. Also, the West River system expanded markets to the East, West Indies, South Americas, and Europe. The cotton gin pulled settlers to the Old Southwest, particularly in the states of Alabama and Mississippi, where the seasons worked just fine in order for cotton to grow. Cotton clothing had become a fashion in Britain, further increasing the production of cotton in the Old Southwest.